Well, Chip Kelly and others have suggested that college football should just be its own sport, which I think is a good idea and a logical one. Don't know if it'll happen, though. In fact, I doubt it.
You are Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with our media rights and mostly team-free and I think still beloved Conference of Champions. So if you haven't already, like, comment, subscribe, rate, review, please and thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by Dawgs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege or enter promo code Locked On College for a free white tech hat with any purchase. You won't want to take your bird dogs off, we promise you. Got my guy Roman Tomashoff here, host of Locked On Huskies, covers the Dogs for Fan Nation at Sports Illustrated. We are doing a Washington record prediction. Both of us will be doing that a bit later in the show, but I wanted to tackle this question first with you, Roman, that Chip Kelly suggested, which is, hey, why doesn't college football break off from all the other sports so that, non-revenue or Olympic sports, whatever you want to call them, don't have to do all this extra travel, which is going to be quite substantial in a lot of teams' cases. Certainly for Oregon and Washington, our teams in the Big Ten, it's pretty significant. It's less so for, the four corner schools in the Big 12, but it's still more than it was in the Pac previously, just when you look at the geography of everything. And I think that that's a good idea, because if football is driving the bus and these other athletes and these other sports don't even get a say, they're not even at the table. I don't think they're even on people's minds when these decisions get made. I don't know why they should have to bear the consequences of it, but I don't think it's going to happen, Roman, because what that would require is for the greatest revenue generation model that college athletics has outside of March Madness, that being college football. It would require the conferences to basically cede their power and give up some money and power and influence on an individual level, because you would have to have a conglomeration of these teams, of these leagues. One group of people would have to be running it, but even if that was each of the, power conference commissioners, you would have to, not be as influential or powerful or perhaps as well paid as you are right now. That's kind of my synopsis on why I don't think a good idea could come to fruition.
No, you hit the nail on the head right there. That's basically all of my thoughts encompassed into one. First of all, Spencer, happy Ahsoka Day. Thank you for having me.
Oh, gosh, I'm so excited. So excited.
So great.
It's a great day.
But no, seriously, that's such a great point that you made there, because will it ever happen? No. Would it be a good idea? Yeah, absolutely. Because there's so much good that could come of just kind of removing football from the equation. But there's also a lot of bad that can come from football being removed from the equation, because it does provide the revenue for so many other sports. And it would be awesome if, sports like softball and soccer and track and field could bring in more revenue to athletic departments. But the sad reality of the situation is that they don't. So there's only so much that can be done without football, because everyone deserves to have the opportunity to play sports at the college level. And without football and basketball bringing in a lot of the revenue, it's sadly not possible. Even baseball, for the most part, is not necessarily feasible for the most part without just the funding that a football team can bring in. And as you said, with Oregon and Washington heading off to the Big Ten, yes, they won't get a full share of the conference revenue until 2030 when the new media deal kicks in. But a full share could look like being somewhere north of $70 or $80 million for both schools when that comes in. So from that, and yeah, it's basically all revolving around football. So from that standpoint, and from the way that you always look at it, just basically from an outsider's perspective, if you showed somebody just the plain numbers about college football without just saying, yeah, this is how it goes down, they would say, oh, is that just its own separate thing off to the side there? And then everything else just kind of falls in line, which is just kind of how is going to how it, my words are so jumbled here because I have so many thoughts all at the same time, is going to be how it has to stay. It won't happen But should it happen? Yeah, sure. There's a world where it's definitely a possibility, but it's just not feasible.
I don't think it's an entirely impossible notion, but what I talked about, the conferences would have to give up perhaps some money, but certainly influence and power and control. I don't think it's in human nature historically to give up any of those things. That's not really how human beings are wired. I think the move that Chip Kelly was referring to and others have discussed is not what you specifically alluded to, which was football breaking away and then being its own sport that is not necessarily tied to the university in the same way, and the athletic department revenue that wouldn't go back to fund all of the other sports pretty much. And for people who don't know, football makes money. And by the way, not even all football programs or Division I athletic departments make money. A lot of them lose money and have to make up for it with student fees or money from elsewhere in the university. But they're non-dollar contributions that a good football team makes to your school as well. But if you're talking about the big programs, football makes money. Men's basketball usually barely breaks even or has a little bit left over profit. Everything else is net negative. That's baseball, that's softball, that's gymnastics, whatever. There's an exception, to a rule across the country, but for the most part, over 95% of the time, they're just not able to. It's just the way it works, and it's because of television. But the suggestion that football should break off and be its own conference, essentially, so that other teams, essentially the Pac-12 would exist with the LA schools under this proposed or this, theoretical model. The Pac-12 would exist with the LA schools and everybody like that for every sport except football, and then football would be its own kind of massive mega conference, but then the money would still go back to the individual schools so that the athletic departments can get funded across the board. Because I am with you 100% about, what you talked about, which was, hey, if football, I think it would be a step towards it, frankly, what I'm talking about here, but what you mentioned, if football ever became completely independent and then the money didn't go back, you are removing opportunities for literally thousands and thousands of kids across the country. And I don't think that helps anybody. And I think that can get lost in the shuffle. And I would never want to see that. It's why when people say, college football should, they should just treat them like employees. They should just do it. No, that opens up a whole bad can of worms that I just cannot get behind. But in theory, this is all a good idea. But like you said, it just feels like too many people would have to give up too much for this to come to reality. Plus, it's 2023. When do good ideas ever come to fruition?
That's a very fair point.
Yeah, it's difficult. But any more thoughts on that? And in college football, just kind of becoming its own conference essentially, and then the conference is running every other sport.
The one thing that I think could really make it feasible in a sense is if the NFL decided to fund things. And it's a really far out kind of theory, but because it's really what we already have is the minor leagues of the NFL. You can look at the XFL, the AAF, whatever else is still out there. Unless the NFL just said, yeah, we're going to start pouring money into college programs, not like, we're going to become feeders, but just yeah, we're already, minor league teams for the NFL. And this is why it's never going to happen. I see the perplexed look on your face.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's an interesting thought though. We have minor league baseball. It's not completely out of the realm of possibility.
It's the only sport that doesn't have a true minor league system. And it will never have one because it's just college to the NFL, which is fine. And it's great. We all love it that way. That's one of the things we love about college sports is it's not necessarily tainted by the whole professional thing for better or for worse. It's a nuanced discussion about NIL, which is a great thing. But unless the NFL decides, hey, we're going to fund this, then it's never going to be feasible as its own thing.
I think that'd be, and that would just make it more complicated. And then I think you'd be increasing the professionalization of anything. So
exactly.
As we laid out at the start of the show, we've come up with several reasons why this probably could not happen. I'm sure many of you have thoughts and comments. It's the internet. That's kind of how this works. So drop them in the YouTube comments below or hit me up on Twitter at Smalls_55 anytime. We're going to talk about actual football, which is so close. I can taste it like I tasted dinner tonight, which I got to say, I cooked up a nice meal for myself earlier. But I can taste football right around the corner, and we're going to make our long-awaited, I'm sure, for all my everydayers out there, record predictions for the Huskies off of a season in which they made me look foolish and silly, and I fully take responsibility for that. I'm not going to doubt them like I did last year, of course, but we got to talk about Bird Dogs, because Bird Dogs are the shorts that do everything for you. They make you look good with their stretch khaki shorts, which are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but they fit way better. You can wear them on a hike, on a date, on a walk, at the beach, on the golf course, everywhere that you want to go, whether you're still in summer mode or you're transitioning to the fall. Bird Dogs can be there for you. So go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege or enter promo code lockedoncollege for a free white tech hat with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedoncollege or promo code lockedoncollege for a free white tech hat. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off, we promise you. So go get some of those Bird Dog stretch khaki shorts. You won't regret it. So go get your next order today. Again, that's birddogs.com/lockedoncollege or enter the promo code lockedon. There are many things in life that are essential: breathing, eating, drinking water. That third one, we very much emphasize here on the show. We call it the second segment, sip. So let's talk about some football here, Roman. Some honest to goodness football.
We're so close.
We are so unbelievably close. I don't think I even realized as we record the show how close we are. This Saturday, there will be college football games. It's not exactly a vaunted lineup of elite teams and programs, but USC will be playing, so we'll get to watch the reigning Heisman Trophy winner do his thing against San Jose State, in which the Trojans are a 30-point favorite. Now, Washington is not a 30-point favorite in their first game of the year, but they are around a 2-touchdown favorite, which you can bet over at FanDuel, of course. So their non-conference games, Roman: Boise State at home, Tulsa at home, and then at Michigan State. Now, at Michigan State is, of course, the game that is most likely to cause a stumble. Last year, Washington went into that game as a 3.5-point favorite, despite Michigan State being ranked 11th. Now, I expect the Spartans to be a bounce-back team this year, but I don't know if they've done enough. Granted, I haven't studied them like I do the Pac-12 schools. I don't know if they can do enough given what Washington is returning to beat the Dawgs here. It's in East Lansing, so that at least gives you pause about, okay, you're on the road, it's early in the season. I think they're going to have a couple of easy games on their schedule as well, so they should be 2-0 and feeling good going into it. They play Central Michigan and Richmond, so yes. I think they will also be 2-0 and feeling good, but that was just such a dominant effort from the Huskies' pass offense a year ago. Michigan State has struggled to defend the pass each of the last couple of seasons. I don't know if they've made the massive upgrades necessary to slow down this Washington passing attack. I assume you don't have them struggling at all with Boise State or Tulsa. I certainly do not at home in particular. But this game against Michigan State, that's going to be kind of your first show me what you're made of moment for Washington in 2023.
No, just like it was in 2022 when they came in ranked 11th in the nation. It was you need to show me. And especially last year, there were so many more questions about just so many things relating to Washington's offense. And Washington's defense necessarily wasn't a big question at the time, but it will be this season. That's going to be what's on the front of everybody's mind because the passing game is going to work. The running game, even though today, Tuesday, Kalen DeBoer announced that running back Cam Davis and offensive lineman guard Memelar are going to be out for the season with a couple of injuries. I'm not concerned about Washington's run game either. I feel like they're going to be able to move the ball very well behind a super talented offensive line. And I was on a Big Ten 10th show last week. Shout out to him. He was a great guy, great follow. And he and I talked a lot about Michigan State's defense and how exactly what you said, Spencer. They haven't necessarily made the upgrades to slow down what I think could end up being the most prolific passing offense in the country because it's not three deep anymore with Rome Odunze, a first-team All-American, Jalen McMillan, a second-team All-American, and Jalen Polk, who was just a stud last year. They also now have Michigan State transfer Jeremy Bernard, who has just been insanely impressive throughout fall camp. And then Denzel Boston, a redshirt freshman, who has been the most impressive player I have seen on the field, bar none. He's just made play after play after play. This Husky offense is going to be a force to be reckoned with. And yeah, there could be some growing pains going into a Big Ten environment. And it could be a little difficult at first for the Huskies, but I do feel like they're going to come out of that game with a W.
Yeah, I feel that way as well. Interesting tidbit here for those who pay attention to analytics and the betting markets and whatnot. ESPN analytics have Washington as a 55% chance of losing that game, which, let's just say, I disagree.
Yeah.
The betting market at FanDuel, however, has Washington as an 11.5 point road favorite.
That's why we like FanDuel.
That there is a disconnect somewhere between our friends at FanDuel and ESPN's analytics numbers, because that is a wide discrepancy, to say the least. Now, what is likely happening here is that ESPN's analytics are factoring in too heavily that Washington is on the road. And again, that's more of a concern, but no sportsbook worth its salt, which FanDuel certainly is, America's number one sportsbook, you could even say, would ever set a line as an 11.5 point road favorite if they didn't think that they were worth that particular number. You may like Michigan State to cover and lose by 10.
Sure.
Heck, I might even be looking at that at the time, because it's a lot of points to win by on the road in what is going to be a ruckus environment for a coach that is motivated to have a bounce back season. I can get behind that, but that jump from Washington, according to ESPN, should be an underdog when they're actually an 11.5 point favorite. I'm leaning towards FanDuel there, and I like Washington to get it done. So they then open Pac-12 play with Cal. Now, I remember watching, but long before I even hosted this show, in case you're wondering my commitment to Pac-12 football, you know the game I'm talking about. It was against Cal. It was in Seattle. It was
2019. Are you talking about the Lightning game?
9, yeah, the Lightning delay game that went until like 1 in the morning.
Yeah, I remember.
And Cal won, didn't they?
Yeah, this is a very differently coached.
Yeah, no,
right off the bat.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I'm not trying to make that point.
You're point I am making, Husky Nation, with that one.
The point I am making is Cal has the same head coach that's got the same sort of identity as the leader of his football program. And this is a Cal team that, like Michigan State, I expect to have a little bit of a bounce back year, that I expect to be bowl eligible, and will play scrappy games as they did against Washington a year ago in Berkeley when it was a 28-21 final. It's like, on paper, by the time the season came to an end, shouldn't have been a 7-point game, but it was. So I like Washington at home here against Cal. I don't think it's easy necessarily all the time. I think it will get easy by the end, because though I like Cal's weapons, I like Washington's quarterback situation a lot more than Cal's, though I'm optimistic about what Sam Jackson could potentially be if he ends up being the starter. He's not going to be able to match Michael Penix, certainly not in Seattle either. I think this is a Huskies victory.
No, absolutely. I do agree, though, that Justin Wilcox is such a talented defensive coach, and he was able to give Kalen DeBoer and Michael Penix and Ryan Grubb some trouble with just some of the coverages he was able to throw at him. And Michael Penix still threw for 300-something yards in that game and looked really good. They just couldn't find the end zone at a consistent basis, which is really what let Cal stay in the game for the most part.
Yeah, and Washington fans know very well, Justin Wilcox is a good defensive coach. He's really smart. If he does not last in the long run as Cal's head coach, I think he gets picked up as a defensive coordinator in about an hour and a half. I think
that seems like a high bar.
I agree. I completely agree. I would take him as Oregon's defensive coordinator in a heart, like calling plays, whatever. Like, that guy knows football, particularly in the secondary. So then they go at Arizona. Then they host Oregon and Oregon State. I think Arizona gave them a good battle.
Oregon and Arizona State. Oregon State is later in the year.
Yeah. Sorry. I meant to say Arizona State. So they go at Arizona. Then they host Oregon and Arizona State. So last year, Arizona walked into Seattle and lost but covered in a game that I remember because I was really confident in Washington covering. I picked them to cover against the Arizona schools in back-to-back weeks, and they went 0 for 2 in their efforts to do so. And Arizona put up a bunch of points, but they couldn't stop Washington if their lives had depended on it. So Washington ended up winning 49-39. I could come on here if I wanted to, if I didn't feel good about the team Washington was putting together in 2023 and say, look at what they did. They, put up a bunch of points and pushed them more than they should have when they were on the road last year. Now they're going to be at home. I could see, if you wanted to talk yourself into that, go for it. I'm not going to be of that belief, though I think Arizona's defense is improved. I don't think it'll be enough, particularly in the secondary, to slow down Washington. So I like them against Arizona here as well.
No, as do I. I think that the desert does give them trouble. There's something to be said about that. It's just kind of been a house of horrors for the Huskies for 20 plus years at Arizona and Arizona State. But the biggest thing that Arizona did last year to stay in the game was throw the ball all over the place. And while they're still going to be good at that, I'm not discrediting them at all. Washington's secondary should be better this year. They were so injured, and they were just demolished by Tatiro McMillan and Dorian Singer, who's now at USC, and Jacob Cowling. So they were still, and I still think that Arizona's going to have themselves a day in the air, but it just won't be nearly on the level of what it was last year.
That's kind of the feeling that I get as well, and I like Washington's pass rush a lot more than Arizona. So in a game of two good, productive quarterbacks, I'll take the team that is going to have a better chance of getting after the other one. Which brings us to that lovely game that is so kind and not mean-spirited every year. For those listening on podcasts, I winked sarcastically. So
you sarcasm? Never.
I know, never. So they host Oregon. I think you and I agree. Arizona State in Seattle. That's not going to happen again. That's not that. It happened a year ago, but that's not happening again. So that game against Oregon. Here's how I feel about that game. I'd lean towards Washington winning because they are at home. Anytime you give me a team or a game where you have two teams that are pretty evenly matched and both should be conference contenders, I'm going to lean towards the team that is at home. Now, my pick here, I will say ahead of time, this is one of my few kind of contingent picks for the Dawgs, or well, really anywhere. But for some reason, Washington just kind of has the most of them for me. If Oregon loses to Texas Tech, I think they will beat Washington.
Okay.
But if they beat Texas Tech, I think they will lose to Washington, and that is simply a law of averages calculation. I think Oregon this year will go 10-2, and I think in their four toughest games, which are Utah, USC, and then Washington and Texas Tech, and I mean Oregon State is in there as well, but Oregon State's at home. But in those four games, I think Oregon is going to split. Okay. And I've been consistent with that with the Pac-12 across the board. I don't think there's a dominant team in this conference. I think there are a lot of really good teams in this conference, which means I am going to be predicting what happened a year ago, which is it's going to come down to tiebreakers and who beat who and who won this sort of stuff. So I think Washington will get it done. Ultimately, they open as a slight favorite against the Ducks. It should be a great game. You and I have talked about how it should be a game day game, but if Oregon does not manage to beat Texas Tech, I think they'll find a way to beat Washington, but I'd suspect they're able to beat Tech and go up, and Washington, I think, can get it done against them for a second year in a row.
No, I like that a lot, and it's something that, we kind of saw last year where Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb really solved Tosh Lupoi's defense, which, isn't that hard, but that's a different thing.
Apparently, yeah. Penix went for what, 410 yards passing?
Something like that.
At Autzen last year.
And just in such a hostile environment. And, with the Ducks being in the top 6 at the time, it was just such an impressive thing to watch. And I think that being at home really will give the Huskies the edge. And with both teams coming off a bye, I kind of just like that extra energy boost that both teams are going to have. I think that there's a real chance that it's going to be the game of the year in the conference.
Yeah, I think it's got a chance to be. I think Oregon, USC could be good. I think Washington, Utah could also be very good. As I'm looking at Washington's schedule here, and I've done all the other teams, I'm realizing there's a flaw in my there's a flaw in my picks.
Okay.
So I'm going to have to make an amendment on the fly. So next game after Oregon is Arizona State. They'll win that. Then they go at Stanford. They're going to win that. I think Stanford goes winless in Pac-12 play this year. Then they go through a gauntlet. I mean, a gauntlet and a half before they play the Apple Cup. And I think they will win the Apple Cup. I assume you do as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. I like Washington State, by the way. I think they're a team that goes over 500 again. I respect the hell out of Jake Dickert. I like Cam Ward. I like their offensive coordinator hire. I just have too many questions about their offensive line and losing Day and Henley on that defense. I think I have more confidence in the defense than the O-line, but I don't think they go into Seattle and beat the Huskies. So as of now, I've got Washington sitting at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 wins. And I'm literally, I didn't realize until I got to this schedule that this gauntlet came all in a row. Yeah. So I have to amend one of my picks. They have to, because based on the schedule predictions I made elsewhere, this is just a complete and utter flaw on my part, but this is kind of how it worked out. So they go at USC after they play Stanford. They host Utah. They go at Oregon State.
Right.
If I had to pick one of those games to win, again, staying consistent with my own philosophy, it would be the Utah game.
Yes.
And I don't think that is a ridiculous thing to suggest that Utah would lose that game on the road, especially given something we're going to talk about really quick to wrap up the show, the quarterback news, which is Cam Rising's health continues to appear up in the air going into week 1. And look, he could miss the game. He could never have been available for the game. He could not be 100% for the game. That gives me real pause. And if Washington is healthy there,
he's going to see Raylan go forth and just be like, yeah, no, that this is not happening again. I'm not getting my helmet popped off for a second time. But Spencer, just kind of my thoughts on that gauntlet, which is just brutal. I think that they can go 2-1 in that stretch. It's going to be really, really hard.
I do too.
I think that if they lose one game of those 3, because 2-1, if they let's say they go into that the USC game, which is the one that I think they lose, what would that be? 8-0? That would be just.
That'd be 9. That'd be 9-0 if they beat USC and they hadn't lost to Oregon. Yeah,
that's right. My mistake. If they go into that 9-0, it's going to be really hard, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on them. I think that there's a chance that both teams go into that game undefeated, which would be really difficult, but would just make for a fantastic matchup. And I think that, playing by Spencer's rules here on your show, I have to respect it. Being in the Coliseum is going to be a little bit too much, because when that place is rocking, it's just one of the best environments in the conference.
Okay, here's the thing. I disagree. I think their environment is pretty weak overall.
I think
their teams have been very good, but I've been in that stadium when they've been good before, and it is not one of the loudest places I've ever been.
No, it's not necessarily that it's loud. It's just that team kind of just feeds off of them so well. And that's something that, we can talk about Caleb Williams all we want. And he's just such an X factor that you kind of have to just throw a game plan out the window with all the things that he can do. And just, we've seen what he can do in some big moments before getting hurt. Obviously the Pac-12 championship game against Utah, he's just such a talented kid, man, that it's really hard to bet against him. And I think Washington's defense is good. I don't know if it's stop Caleb Williams level good.
Okay, you know what I'm actually going with here?
Let's hear it.
I made an amendment on the show recently to USC's record prediction, which I originally had at 11-1. I knocked them down to 10-2, and I had them losing to Notre Dame.
Okay.
But in light of how these are all going to play out, because Washington is not going to win all 3 games, but they're not losing all 3 games.
Also,
they're not losing, and based on how my other record schedule predictions played out, I would have had them losing 3 games in a row, and I don't like that whatsoever. So the season hasn't started yet, so I have the right to make amendments. As Colin Cowherd would say, our Constitution has amendments. I can make amendments. So I am actually going to stick with the Utah game being a loss and the Oregon State game being a loss, and I will take a win at the Coliseum over USC.
Okay.
Because USC needed a loss, and I said, Notre Dame because they're on the road, but I don't know if I love Notre Dame. I think Sam Hartman is pretty good, but I don't know if Marcus Freeman is that good. I don't know if they'll be able to keep up with USC's offense, but Washington USC should be a 48-45 shootout like the battle for Los Angeles was a season ago.
I'd love that.
So I'm gonna go with USC being the game they win. I think they lose to Utah and they lose at Oregon State. And I think that would put me at 10-2 for the Huskies, 9-3 if Oregon loses to Texas Tech, because that means I think that Oregon would be able to go in and win in Seattle. That's my thinking there.
Okay, I like that. I have them at 11-1. I think that there's a lot of variance that can happen. I've got like a floor of somewhere around 8-4, 9-3. If they don't have
8-4 is like the minimum floor.
Yes, no, it's everything has gone wrong is 8-4, and the ceiling is somewhere around 11-1. There's a possibility they get 12-0. I don't think it's going to happen.
I don't think anybody in the pack is 12-0. Not even USC.
I have to put it on record, so then if it does happen, I can say, hey, that's what I said the whole time. You can just clip out 12-0.
You're just covering your rear end here. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. You got it. Okay, so I land at 10-2, maybe 9-3, but I think it's more likely they go 10-2, and I think 11-1 is more likely than 9-3 this year for the Dawgs. So I would lean towards the over bet for their 9.5 preseason win total. But I think that Oregon State game is going to be tough. That's a game that a year ago they should have lost in Seattle. I thought Oregon State played better than them for the majority of the game, and Washington.
You do have to remember, though, that was in the weirdest weather conditions they had seen all year.
It was. That's true, but who's to say that when they go to Reser on November 18th, it's not going to be ideal conditions for throwing the football?
In fairness, though, ideal conditions for throwing the football does not equal an atmospheric river. That was I was on the field for that game.
It was definitely abnormal with the wind and everything, but I think Oregon State is a really good team, and they're a really, really good home team. And I think in the trenches, and I think schematically with their coaches, they can go toe-to-toe with Washington.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't know if their defensive line is quite as good as Washington's. It's probably not. But here's the thing. Washington's greatest strength defensively, I think, gets somewhat neutralized by Oregon State, and that's their defensive front, right? Zion Tupuola-Fatui, you have Braylon Trice in there. Sure. Oregon State's offensive line might be the best in the conference this season. Yeah. That's not... I don't think that's even a hot take. I think it'd be a hot take to say they're not going to be the best. It'd be them, USC, or Utah, most likely, but I'd put Oregon State in the top two. So Roman's sitting, just to recap here, because we got kind of into the weeds. Roman's at 11-1 for the Dawgs. I'm at 10-2, contingent upon Oregon beating Texas Tech. If that happens, I think they will split those two road games. I don't think they'll go 0-2 between Texas Tech and Washington, but I don't think they're quite good enough to be 2-0 either. So 10-2 for the Dawgs. Like a lot of teams in the pack, I think it'll be muddy and gross and tiebreakery as well as it was a season ago. Real quick, and I'll talk about this more on tomorrow's show because we kind of got into the weeds, but in a good way. A lot of quarterback news in the Pac-12. And I'll just get your 60-second reaction to each of these headlines, Roman, and then I'll touch on them more on tomorrow's show. Reports are that Jaden Rashada is going to start at Arizona State. Cam Rising's health is in legitimate question, at least in the eyes of the betting markets who are preparing for the possibility he doesn't play against Florida. That would call into question how well he'd be able to stay healthy over the course of the season. And DJ Uiagalelei, perhaps unsurprisingly, is named Oregon State starter officially. Your 60-second reaction to those three pieces of quarterback news.
I'll start with the Cam Rising one because it's brief. Not good. That's bad. They've got some talent there, but without Cam Rising, I don't know how they can put it together. Jaden Rashada, that's a great choice for Kenny Dillingham in his first year. I feel like that's a really exciting thing to do moving forward. It's just, we're going to kind of rebuild this year and just see what happens and full go in 2024. And then with DJ, I don't know how I feel about his weapons. I think they're okay, but what we just talked about Oregon State's offensive line, I think that they're going to do a really good job at helping him out. But I really do want to keep an eye on Aiden Chillis. He's somebody who
Childs.
I apologize. I said it 4 different ways. They're all wrong. I apologize, Aiden. But it's something where Washington was recruiting him real hard for a while, ended up going to Oregon State. And as he continued to rise throughout the process, he's a really impressive kid. And with DJ being in his final year of eligibility, why not see what you have? If you're up big, or maybe you're down big, if something goes horribly wrong, why not give it a shot? I'm really excited to watch him.
I think DJ might have one more year after.
Does he?
This.
I think you're right. I think he might have the COVID year.
He might. Yeah, I think he was around in the COVID year. That sounds right. But anyway, so I'll touch on that more tomorrow. We'll call it there for today. Football is so close, everybody. I cannot wait. Roman Tomashoff is at rtomashoff34 on Twitter if you want to go check him out. He's the host of Locked On Huskies on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, and he covers Washington for Fan Nation at Sports Illustrated. Roman, fun stuff. I cannot wait till we get to actually see how these predictions all play out and which ones we feel like we need to change based on the information that'll come in over the course of the season. Thanks, man.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time, and until then, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.